Hey, stop scrolling for a second. This isn't just another rich family story. This is about a maid nobody bothered to remember, and a billionaire who never forgot her. Tonight, in front of 300 people dripping in diamonds, a fiancée in a red silk gown was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was humiliating the help. She had no idea she was about to humiliate herself in front of the one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's in that room. And by the time the chandelier lights dimmed for the toast, nothing would ever be the same again. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and which country you belong to. I read every single comment, so don't be shy. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones I've ever told on this channel. It's about pride, cruelty, memory, and the kind of quiet dignity that money can never buy. Some of you are going to cry. Some of you are going to want to stand up and cheer. Just stay with me till the end because you will not see this coming. Let's get into it. Nobody in that ballroom knew her real name. Amara Bell moved through the crowd like she was invisible, because that's exactly what a maid is trained to be at a party like this. Invisible, silent, useful but never seen. The Whitmore estate in Charleston, South Carolina, was lit up like something out of a movie that night. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. A live orchestra played somewhere near the marble staircase. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne that cost more per glass than Amara made in a week. It was the engagement party of the year. Ethan Whitmore, 34 years old, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country, was about to announce his marriage to Vanessa Cole, 32, a former pageant queen turned lifestyle influencer, with 2 million followers and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Amara had been hired 3 weeks earlier through a staffing agency, along with a dozen other workers, just to help the Whitmore household prepare for the big night. She wasn't the head housekeeper. She wasn't even full-time. She was 29 years old, a single mother, and she needed this job more than she needed her pride, because pride doesn't pay rent, and it definitely doesn't pay hospital bills. Her son, Micah, was 6 years old and had been battling a rare kidney condition since he was 3. Every extra shift Amara picked up went straight into a folder labeled Micah's Fund, that she kept hidden under her mattress. Tonight's event alone would cover 2 weeks of his medication. She adjusted her apron, took a breath, and picked up a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres. That's when she saw him. Ethan Whitmore was standing near the fireplace, laughing at something one of his business partners said, dressed in a white tuxedo jacket that made him look like he belonged on a magazine cover. He had that easy, effortless charm rich men are supposed to have, but there was something else in his face too. Something tired. Something that didn't quite match the smile. Amara's chest tightened. She hadn't seen that face in 11 years. Not up close. Not like this. Back then, he wasn't Ethan Whitmore, billionaire tech founder. Back then, he was just Ethan, a skinny 23-year-old college dropout who used to sit alone in the back booth of the diner where Amara worked the night shift, nursing 1 cup of black coffee for 3 hours because it was the only thing he could afford. His father had lost everything in a bad investment. His mother had passed away that same year. He had nowhere to sleep some nights, and Amara, 18 at the time, barely older than him, working double shifts to help her own mother, used to slip him a plate of food on the house and tell the manager it was a mistake in the order. She never told him her real reason. She just didn't like the idea of anyone going hungry, especially someone who looked like he'd already lost everything that mattered. He used to talk to her about his ideas. Wild ideas. An app that would change how small businesses manage deliveries. She used to listen while wiping down tables, half because she was being polite, and half because something in his eyes told her he actually believed it. Then one night he didn't come back. She never knew why. She assumed the worst, that the streets had swallowed him up like they swallowed so many others. She never imagined that 11 years later, she'd be standing in his mansion holding a tray of shrimp cocktail, and he'd be about to marry a woman currently pointing directly at her from across the room. Ooh. Yes, you. Vanessa Cole's voice rang out, sharp and syrupy sweet at the same time. Come here. Amara froze for half a second, then walked over, tray balanced, spine straight. Vanessa looked her up and down slowly, deliberately, the way someone examines something they've already decided is beneath them. Sweetheart, Vanessa said, loud enough for the small circle of guests around her to hear. Did nobody tell you that you're supposed to smile? You look like you're at a funeral, not my engagement party. Few people chuckled awkwardly. Amara kept her eyes down, the way she'd been trained to. Of course, ma'am. I apologize, she said quietly. Vanessa's friend, a tall woman named Brielle wrapped in a shimmering blue gown, leaned in and whispered something that made Vanessa laugh. A sharp, cutting laugh that carried further than she probably realized. Amara felt her face go hot, but she didn't move. She'd learned a long time ago that dignity isn't about winning every moment. Sometimes it's just about surviving it without losing yourself. She had no idea that across the room, a pair of familiar eyes had just landed on her, and gone completely still. Ethan Whitmore's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. First he thought he was imagining things. It happened sometimes. A stranger's laugh, a certain way someone tilted their head, and for half a second his mind would drag him back 11 years to a diner booth and a cup of coffee that never seemed to run out. But this wasn't a trick of memory. That was her. The same warm brown eyes. The same small, determined set of her jaw when she was trying not to let something bother her. Older now, yes. There were tiny lines near her eyes that hadn't been there before, and something about her posture spoke of years of quiet exhaustion. But it was undeniably her. The waitress who used to feed him when he had nothing. The woman he had spent years trying and failing to track down. Ethan set his glass down on the nearest table without excusing himself and started walking. His business partner called his name behind him. He didn't hear it. His future mother-in-law waved at him from across the room. He barely registered it. His feet knew exactly where they were going before his brain had fully caught up. He arrived just in time to hear Vanessa's voice rise again. Actually, Vanessa was saying, turning her wine glass slowly between two manicured fingers, let's make this a little fun. I want a real toast tonight, something memorable. Why don't you say something for us, sweetheart? She gestured toward Amara with mock generosity. Give a little toast to the happy couple. I'm sure you have some wisdom from wherever you're from. Brielle snorted into her champagne. A small cluster of guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to laugh or look away. Amara's hands tightened slightly around the tray, but her voice remained level. I don't think that would be appropriate, ma'am. I'm just here to help with the food. Oh, come on. Vanessa's smile sharpened. Don't be shy. Or is it that you don't actually know any big words? The words landed like a slap. Few people actually gasped. That's when Ethan stepped into the circle. Vanessa. His voice wasn't loud, but something in it made the entire cluster of guests go quiet immediately. Vanessa turned, her smile snapping back into place like a mask sliding on. Ethan. There you are, baby, I heard what you were doing. His eyes moved past her to Amara, and something in his expression softened completely. Disbelief, warmth, an old kind of gratitude that had been waiting 11 years to be spoken. Amara. Amara's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to remember her name. She hadn't even been sure until this exact moment that this really was the same Ethan. You remember me, she whispered. Remember you. A short, disbelieving laugh escaped him, and for a second the polished billionaire persona cracked completely, revealing the exhausted, grateful 23-year-old underneath. Amara, I spent 2 years trying to find you after I left Charleston. I went back to that diner. They told me you'd quit, moved away with your mom. I never. He stopped, shaking his head. I never got the chance to thank you. Vanessa's face had gone very still, her champagne glass frozen halfway to the small table beside her. I'm sorry, she said, forcing a laugh that didn't quite work. Ethan, what is happening right now? You know the maid. The word maid came out with a curl of disdain that made several guests wince. Ethan turned to face her fully now, and the warmth that had just been in his eyes for Amara cooled into something else entirely. Something careful, something assessing. Her name is Amara, he said quietly. And 11 years ago when I had nothing, no money, no family, nowhere to sleep some nights, she fed me. Every single night. Out of her own paycheck, because she told her manager it was a mistake in the kitchen so I wouldn't feel like I owed her charity. He paused, looking around at the small crowd that had now gone completely silent, phones lowering, conversations dying mid-sentence. I built my entire company on an idea I first said out loud in that diner booth. To her. Because she was the only person who ever asked me what I wanted to build, instead of asking me why I hadn't given up yet. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. Brielle had taken a very deliberate step backward, suddenly extremely interested in her own shoes. That's a sweet story, baby, Vanessa said, recovering quickly, sliding her arm through his. But that was a long time ago. Things are different now. She's staff. I didn't mean anything by. You called her stupid, Ethan said flatly. In front of my guests. Because she wouldn't perform for you. The silence in the ballroom had a texture now, thick and electric. Somewhere near the back, a server had stopped mid-step, tray balanced, watching. Amara stood very still, the tray of shrimp cocktail beginning to feel impossibly heavy in her hands, unsure whether to speak, to leave, or to simply disappear into the marble floor. She had absolutely no idea that this was only the beginning of what this night was about to become. For a moment nobody moved. Vanessa's grip on Ethan's arm tightened, her knuckles going pale against the fabric of his white jacket. Ethan, can we please talk about this privately? You're embarrassing me in front of everyone. I'm embarrassing you, Ethan repeated, and there was something almost disbelieving in his voice, like he was hearing the words for the first time and testing how absurd they sounded out loud. Vanessa, you just humiliated a woman in a room full of 300 people because she works for a living. And you're worried about being embarrassed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Somewhere to the left, an older woman in emerald green, Ethan's aunt as it turned out, quietly said, "Well, I never," in a tone that made it very clear whose side she was already on. Amara finally set the tray down on a nearby table, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from the sheer surreal weight of the moment. "Ethan, please," she said softly, stepping forward. "It's okay. I don't want to cause a scene at your engagement. I'll just—" "You didn't cause anything," Ethan said, turning to her. His voice suddenly gentle again, the way it had been when he first saw her across the room. "You never caused anything. You gave. That's all you ever did." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, and for a second Amara thought he was simply checking a notification, but instead he turned the screen toward the small crowd. On it was a photo, clearly years old, slightly grainy, of a much younger, gaunter Ethan standing outside a diner at night, one arm slung around the shoulders of a young woman in a waitress uniform, both of them laughing at something off camera. "I kept this picture for 11 years, he said. It was taken the night I told her I'd finally saved enough to submit my business plan to an investor. She's the only person who believed it would actually go anywhere. Vanessa stared at the photo like it had personally insulted her. That's a diner photo, Ethan. I don't understand what you... I know you don't, he said, and this time there was no gentleness left in his voice at all. That's kind of the point. He turned back to Amara. Can I ask you something? Why are you working as a maid? Last I heard, you were studying to become a nurse. The question landed differently than he expected. Amara's composed expression cracked, just slightly, just enough for the pain underneath to show through. My son, she said quietly. Micah. He's 6. He has a kidney condition. I had to stop my nursing program to work full-time and cover his treatments. Insurance doesn't cover everything and... She swallowed hard. This job pays well for a few weeks of work. I needed it. The room had gone completely, utterly silent now. Even the orchestra, sensing something was happening, had quietly stopped playing. Ethan's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't say anything at all, just looked at her with an expression that mixed disbelief, guilt, and something fiercely protective all at once. You gave me food when you had almost nothing yourself, he finally said. And now your son is sick, and you're serving shrimp cocktail at my engagement party to pay for his medicine, while my fiancé mocks you for not smiling enough. Ethan. Vanessa tried again, her voice climbing higher, panicked now. This is not what it looks like. I didn't know about her son. How was I supposed to? You weren't supposed to know, Ethan said. You were just supposed to be decent. That's it. That's the whole bar, Vanessa. And you didn't clear it. He stepped back from her, just slightly, but the physical distance seemed to carry a far heavier meaning than a few inches of marble floor. I think, he said slowly, we need to talk. Not later. Now. Vanessa's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, humiliation, fury, before finally settling on something colder and more calculating. Fine, she snapped, loud enough that half the room heard it. Let's talk about how you're choosing to blow up our engagement, in front of everyone, over the help. Don't call her that again, Ethan said. His voice suddenly low and dangerous in a way nobody in that ballroom had ever heard from him before. Somewhere near the back of the crowd, Brielle had already quietly slipped out a side door, clearly deciding that whatever alliance she'd built with Vanessa was no longer worth being seen anywhere near. Amara stood frozen in the middle of it all, her heart pounding, painfully aware that everyone, the guests, the waitstaff, Ethan's family, was now looking directly at her. She had come to this party to serve food and earn a paycheck for her son's medicine. She had absolutely no idea that within the next 10 minutes, her entire life was about to change forever. Everyone, Ethan said, raising his voice just enough to carry across the ballroom without shouting. I'm sorry to interrupt the evening like this, but I think, given what just happened, you all deserve some honesty instead of a toast. He walked to the small raised platform near the orchestra, the same spot where, 20 minutes earlier, he was supposed to formally announce his engagement to Vanessa Cole. Someone handed him a microphone out of instinct, though he barely seemed to notice. Vanessa stood frozen near the fireplace, arms crossed tightly. Her face a mixture of humiliation and rage that she was clearly struggling to keep contained in front of so many cameras and phones. 11 years ago, Ethan began. I was homeless. Not between apartments homeless. Actually, genuinely homeless. My father had lost everything in a failed investment, my mother had just passed away, and I was sleeping in my car most nights outside a 24-hour diner in Charleston, because at least there was a bathroom and some nights a plate of food I didn't ask for. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Most of these people had only ever known Ethan Whitmore as the confident, self-made tech founder featured on magazine covers. Nobody, aside from his closest family, knew the beginning of that story. That food came from a waitress named Amara, he continued, gesturing toward her. She stood near the edge of the room, cheeks flushed, unsure whether to feel proud or mortified at being the center of attention. She was 18 years old. She was working double shifts to help her own family. And every single night, she found a way to make sure I ate something, without ever making me feel like a charity case. She's the reason I didn't give up on my idea. She's the reason Whitmore Logistics exists at all. He paused, looking directly at Vanessa now. Tonight, I watched my fiancé mock her, call her stupid, demand she perform like some kind of entertainment for our guests. And when I stepped in, I was told I was the one embarrassing her. Ethan, please don't do this here, Vanessa started, but her voice had lost all its earlier sharpness. It cracked, small and pleading now, aware of exactly how this looked in front of 300 witnesses and at least a dozen phone cameras. I built my company on the belief that people deserve to be treated with dignity, no matter what job they're doing or how much money they have, Ethan continued, ignoring her. I don't think I can spend the rest of my life with someone who doesn't actually believe that. Not deep down. Not when it matters. The silence that followed was the kind that presses against your eardrums. Vanessa's mother, sitting near the front, had gone pale. Ethan's aunt was quietly nodding, arms crossed, a look of fierce approval on her face. Ethan set the microphone down and walked directly toward Amara, ignoring the whispers erupting around him. I want to make this right, he said quietly, just to her. Not because you fed me 11 years ago and I owe you a favor. Because you're a genuinely good person. And good people shouldn't have to work 3 jobs and skip their own dreams just to keep their kid healthy while people like Vanessa throw champagne parties for fun. Amara's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for what felt like years, not just one night. I don't need anything from you, Ethan, she said softly. I didn't come here for this. I came here to work. I know, he said. That's exactly why I'm offering. He turned to the small crowd, most of whom were now watching with genuine emotion rather than shock. Several women were dabbing at their eyes, and even a few of the stiff-suited business partners looked visibly moved. I'm covering the full cost of Micah's treatment, Ethan announced. All of it ongoing. And I'm funding the rest of Amara's nursing degree, because apparently she was on track to become exactly the kind of person this world desperately needs more of, before life got in the way. A quiet ripple of applause started somewhere near the back and spread slowly through the room. Vanessa, standing alone now near the fireplace, looked around at the guests who, only 20 minutes ago, had been laughing along with her jokes. Nobody was laughing now. Nobody was even looking at her with sympathy. She grabbed her clutch bag off the table and without another word, walked briskly toward the exit, her heels echoing sharply against the marble floor in a silence that felt like the loudest sound in the world. Amara stood in the middle of the ballroom, tears streaming freely down her face now, completely overwhelmed, completely unprepared for the fact that the worst moment of her professional life had somehow turned into the beginning of something entirely different. The days after the party moved fast, almost too fast for Amara to fully process. Video clips from the ballroom had already spread across social media by the next morning, filmed quietly on phones by guests who couldn't resist capturing the moment a billionaire publicly ended his engagement to defend a maid. By noon it was trending nationally. By evening, news outlets were reaching out to the Whitmore estate for comment. Amara ignored her phone for most of it. She had a 6-year-old to take care of, and Micah didn't care about trending hashtags. He cared about his cartoons, his grilled cheese sandwiches, and whether his mom would sit with him during his dialysis appointment that Thursday. But on Thursday morning, something changed everything about that appointment. Amara arrived at the children's hospital expecting the usual. The same waiting room, the same worried calculations about which bill to pay first, the same quiet dread that lived permanently in her chest whenever Micah's numbers came back slightly off. Instead, a hospital administrator met her at the front desk. "Ms. Bell, I need you to come with me for a moment." Amara's stomach dropped, assuming the worst, until the woman smiled warmly and explained. "Your son's entire treatment plan has been fully covered. Dialysis, medication, the transplant evaluation, everything, for as long as it's needed. It's already been processed." Amara had to sit down. "I don't understand," she said. "Covered by who?" The administrator slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a letter, simple and direct, signed by Ethan Whitmore, along with contact information for a case coordinator whose sole job, apparently, was to make sure Micah never had a single gap in his care again. Amara read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. That evening, Ethan showed up at her apartment, a small 2-bedroom place on the edge of town, nothing like the world he lived in, carrying a bag of groceries and, oddly, a soccer ball. "Micah mentioned he likes soccer," he said, a little sheepishly, when Amara opened the door with a confused expression. "I wasn't sure what else to bring." "You didn't have to do any of this," Amara said, stepping aside to let him in, still slightly in shock at seeing a billionaire standing awkwardly in her narrow hallway. "I know I didn't have to," Ethan said. "I wanted to. There's a difference." Over the following weeks, something quiet and unexpected began to grow, not out of a fairy tale cinematic romance, but out of something far more grounded. Ethan started visiting regularly, first to check on Micah's treatment, then simply because he genuinely enjoyed being there. He'd sit on the living room floor, completely ignoring his $3,000 suit, helping Micah build Lego cities for hours. He listened when Amara talked about her interrupted nursing dreams, and instead of just offering to pay for the rest of her degree, he asked her what kind of nurse she actually wanted to become. Pediatric, like the doctors currently treating her son. "I want to help kids like Micah," she admitted one evening, sitting on her tiny balcony with 2 cups of coffee between them. "Kids whose parents can't afford the right care. I know exactly what that fear feels like." "Then that's what you should do," Ethan said simply. "I'll make sure money is never the reason you can't." Meanwhile, Vanessa's public image had taken a hit that no amount of publicist damage control could fully repair. The viral clips of her mocking Amara had been dissected endlessly online, and while some defended her as simply having a bad night, most viewers had made up their minds the moment they heard the phrase, "Give a little toast, sweetheart," dripping with condescension. She issued a public apology 2 weeks later, carefully worded, professionally lit, clearly written by a PR team, but it did little to change what 300 people in that ballroom, and eventually millions online, had already witnessed with their own eyes. Amara, for her part, felt no satisfaction in Vanessa's downfall. She wasn't interested in revenge. She had spent her whole life being underestimated, overlooked, and occasionally humiliated by people who mistook a uniform for a measure of worth. What she wanted now was simpler and far more important. A healthy son, a finished degree, and maybe, for the first time in 11 years, a life that didn't feel like it was constantly one emergency away from collapse. She had no idea that the biggest twist of this entire story was still waiting for her. 3 months down the line, in a small hospital conference room she'd been called into without any explanation at all. 3 months later, Amara sat nervously in a small conference room at the children's hospital, unsure why she'd been asked to come in without Micah. Across the table sat Dr. Patel, the hospital's chief of pediatric nephrology, along with 2 other administrators Amara didn't recognize. "Ms. Bell," Dr. Patel began, folding her hands on the table, "I want to first say that Micah is doing remarkably well." His latest numbers are the best we've seen since his diagnosis. Amara exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank God. We actually asked you here for a different reason, Dr. Patel continued, smiling now. We understand you were partway through a nursing program before you had to withdraw. Yes, Amara said slowly. Pediatric nursing. I had about a year and a half left. Mr. Whitmore reached out to our hospital foundation a few weeks ago, Dr. Patel said. He's fully funding a new scholarship program specifically for parents of chronically ill children who had to pause their medical education to care for their kids. You'd be the first recipient, full tuition, plus a paid clinical position here once you finish your degree, working directly in pediatric nephrology, if that's something you'd want. Amara sat completely still, her mind struggling to catch up with what she was hearing. He named it after you, actually, one of the administrators added, sliding a folder across the table. On the cover, in simple lettering, it read, The Amara Bell Family Support Scholarship. Amara's hands trembled as she opened the folder, tears blurring the page before she could even finish reading the first paragraph. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't even known it was happening. And somehow that made it mean even more. That evening, she found Ethan waiting outside her apartment building, leaning against his car with the same slightly nervous expression he'd worn the night he first showed up with groceries and a soccer ball. You didn't have to name it after me, she said, still holding the folder against her chest. I know, Ethan said, echoing the same words from weeks earlier. I wanted to. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who used to be a stranger in a diner booth, who had somehow grown into someone capable of both extraordinary success and extraordinary kindness, without letting one erase the other. Why me, Ethan? Really? There are 1,000 ways you could have helped quietly without any of this. She gestured vaguely, meaning the viral videos, the headlines, the public unraveling of his old life. Because you never once, in 11 years, expected anything back, he said simply. You fed a stranger because it was the right thing to do, not because you thought it would ever come back to you. That kind of person is rare, Amara. The world doesn't reward people like that nearly enough. I just wanted to be one small correction to that. Amara didn't have a clever response to that. She simply let herself cry, quietly, standing on the sidewalk outside her apartment, holding a folder that represented a future she thought she'd lost years ago. Micah is 7 years old now. His health has stabilized enough that doctors are cautiously optimistic about his long-term outlook. Amara graduated with her nursing degree 18 months later and now works exactly where she always dreamed of working, helping other frightened parents navigate the exact nightmare she once lived through herself, but this time with the resources to actually make a difference. She and Ethan didn't rush into anything. What grew between them wasn't a fairy tale spark. It was something slower, steadier, built on 11 years of quiet gratitude and 3 months of showing up again and again, without asking for anything in return. Whether it becomes something more is a story still being written. But the moral of this one isn't really about romance at all. It's this: kindness is never wasted, even when you think nobody's watching, even when you think it'll never be repaid. The smallest act of decency, a plate of food, a moment of patience, a choice to treat someone like they matter, can echo further into the future than you'll ever know. And the people who try to humiliate others to feel powerful, they almost always end up revealing far more about themselves than about the person they were trying to tear down. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor. Hit that like button, it genuinely helps this channel grow. Subscribe if you want more real, emotional stories like this one, because we've got so many more coming. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back around, share this with them today. Thank you for watching till the very end. I'll see you in the next story.